Smart 24, driving business.
Apologies to our audience tonight. We know that we have had a technical challenge amidst our discussion, but I hope that now everything will be stable and we will be having a delightful conversation with our international experts that we have tonight to discuss with us, issues pertaining digital ledger platforms, which are often referred to as the blockchain platforms. And these are a type of distributed ledger technologies that enable secure, transparent, and decentralized record keeping. Now, earlier on, I mentioned to you that the most well-known application of digital ledger platforms is in cryptocurrencies like Bitcoin, but there are potential extents, and we know that we have other examples, but we have international experts with us tonight that will be sharing with us other examples and what it means for us to be using these digital ledger platforms in our businesses, in our organizations, and so many other areas in different industries and different sectors of the economy. Now, let's dive into this conversation. We don't have a lot of time with us tonight, but let's dive into this conversation together with our international experts online. And I would like to go back to Teddy, who was discussing with us a brief overview of what digital ledger platforms are and their significance in the modern technological landscape. Teddy Meyer, are you there?
I am here. Thank you very much indeed. As I had mentioned earlier, I'm glad to be back. And distributed ledger technologies, you can derive what they are from their name. Distributed here means you have multiple parties who can actively participate, execute, and verify the information that runs through this system. This means that as opposed to how other systems have been working, where there has been a central point, whether you're talking about a central bank, you're talking about one single control point, this now becomes distributed. So all participants within a system have a synchronized copy of their data, which is the second part, which is the ledger. If you remember, from accounting, the record keeping and the person responsible for sort of balancing data. Copy and participate in keeping those records. So there isn't a centralized or focal point that controls the data. And this makes distributed ledger technologies quite important in one sense, that then they become transparent and verifiable by anybody on the system. And some people argue that they're immutable in the sense that if anybody changes anything on the system, it will become patently obvious to anyone else because those changes will be seen, which then de-risks platforms. However, this creates certain challenges and opportunities. Challenges in the sense that if you look at national level, central banks, which when it comes to finance, have been the single control point of how economies work and how funding goes within a country, then there needs to be some form of legal reform that allows for distributed ledger technologies to work. And the other thing that is important to mention in this, a lot of how trade and finance work is that you have multiple parties trying to achieve the same objective. And so it has to be multi-sectoral or multi-agency, whether you're talking about customs, whether you're talking about tax. All these agencies sometimes use different platforms or use different technologies, but DLT makes it possible to make them interoperable. What is quite important to me as a lawyer is that technology now is making possible things that the law either did not permit or that the law had not contemplated. And this is where we have a challenge, and I'm happy to speak about it further down in the show.
Well, maybe, Clayton, if I may just edit. in fact, he explained what the blockchain means to us. It's in fact a distributed ledger, which is a system that allows parties who don't fully trust each other to come to consensus about the existence, nature, and evolution of a set of shared facts. Without, and that's an important thing, without having to rely on a fully trusted centralized third party like a notary or a lawyer. And that, in fact, enables parties in a trade transaction to trust the data that is being shared on the ledger to make decisions, to continue with a relationship or to continue with a trade transaction. And as a result, it will in the financial industry and enable parties in the trade ecosystem to transact based on data that is available and that wasn't available in the traditional way of working. So that really will help in getting trade right on a number of places where in the past technology was not available.
Thank you so much, Chris Sanderman, and I also want to thank Ted for giving us that brief overview of what it means for us to be involved with digital ledger platforms. And he was very clear in explaining the significance of these digital ledger platforms, especially when it comes to the modern world today. And maybe Chris Sanderman, let me stick with you for a minute. Chris. How would you explain blockchain technology to someone maybe in Uganda or in East Africa or anywhere in any part of the world? How would you explain to them the blockchain technology to a non-technical person? How would you explain blockchain technologies and all these digital ledger platforms to someone who does not have a technical background on this? Hello, Chris.
Yeah.
The question was to you. Can you hear me?
Well, there are multiple ways to explain it, but yeah, I hear the question. I hope you can hear me. Please raise your thumb if you can. Like I said, the distributed ledger is a system which you can compare to a high-definition internet, but the difference is that it's a trusted environment, and the parties on the distributed ledger use a key password and a log into the system, have gained onto that server. They are allowed to be on that ledger, and it allows parties who don't trust each other to come to consensus by sharing the data, which is in fact only visible for those parties who have access to that certain network, so to the ledger. So buyer and seller, as an example, have access to a certain place on the platform. They know know by hashes who their counterparty is, so they know by turning the key and using the password they have to have access to the platform. They share data on that certain platform, and only the one who is connected to the data that is being shared on the platform is allowed to see that data, and as a result, trusted between buyer and seller in this case, because they have access to that ledger, and they don't have to rely on a third party to prove that buyer is the one who says he is, and the seller doesn't have to prove that. Yeah, so in that case, parties on the platform are trusted parties and able to transact with each other.
Thank you so much, Chris. That was a very good explanation. Yes, Ted.
If I may jump in, you asked, I'm East African myself, I'm Kenyan, and I'll just give you an example of in the village when someone there was a single shopkeeper, and people did not have money all the time. So what they would do, you'd go to a shopkeeper, you'd pick, your bread or your unga, as we call it there, and the shopkeeper would record. Now, at the end of the month, or depending on when you're paid, or at the end of the harvest when you sell your wares, you go back to the shopkeeper, you do a reconciliation. The shopkeeper said on X date you picked this, and that, and then you pay. Now imagine a system where every time you pick something, it automatically notifies everybody that you've picked 3 packets of milk or you've picked 1 packet of that. And at the end of the month, the shopkeeper does not have the sole power to decide that you owe them 100,000 Uganda shillings. So this is what distributed ledger is that it decentralizes and ensures that there's transparency and there's fairness and there's verifiability of what has happened. So each transaction, each party keeps a record. So there isn't a central book where someone can inflate, or maybe you can go and talk to the shopkeeper's son to sneak out, 3 packets of milk. Every time something happens on the platform, every party involved can verify that data. That if there's someone, listening from rural Uganda or Kenya or wherever, this is how distributed ledger technology works as far as centralizations go.
Let me stick with you, Ted, for a moment. Let me stick with you, Ted, for a minute. Ted, you gave a very good example, of shopkeepers and how they can actually use such a platform for their businesses. But are there other cases you could share with us? How do we use such technologies when it comes to preferably finance and banking? How do we use such technologies when it comes to supply chain management? Because you actually explained a supply chain system when you actually mentioned that example. So how can we use blockchain to track production, to track the delivery of goods, but at the same time also enhance transparency and reduce fraud? Because there is an issue of security that we need to also highlight to our audience. How do we track production? How do we track transparency? How do we use fraud using these blockchain ledger technologies? Ted.
That is a brilliant question. The whole point of blockchain technology was to essentially do that. Chris had explained, that especially where you have parties that don't trust one another, we use intermediaries, we use lawyers, we use government, we use central banks. So I've used the example of a village. If I elevate that slightly to national level, distributed ledger technologies now, the keen interest is with generally about 3 main sectors. You have trade, you have central banks, you have capital markets, and you have communications or authorities. And there's a particular reason for this. So if you look at supply chain management, the example I've given with a shopkeeper, now think of, these are maybe 2 or 3 parties. Now think of trade, like a farmer who then gets their produce to export to a third country. The number of licenses that are needed, the number of parties that are needed, the transportation that's required, the tax implications. So all these parties, if you elevate them and put them on a distributed ledger, then the qualities of distributed ledger make these trades possible, especially for smaller players who cannot afford to pay multiple intermediaries or who cannot afford to pay for verification of each step. So some of the use cases are central banks. Central banks are interested in distributed ledger technology because cryptocurrencies were one of the ways in which distributed ledger was used. So systems that were trading outside of current financial systems then attracted governments to have an interest in this. The other thing, of course, is trade. And I'll hand over to Jose very shortly because he also will explain in far more flowery language than mine. Imagine a trade cycle where something is leaving a farm and going, say, in Uganda and going to Chris Sanderman in Holland. You will need customs, you will need tax, you will need transportation, both internally and externally, and all these parties, there are costs involved. And if a party is a small party, and in Africa we know more than 90% of businesses are small or micro enterprises, therefore, how do they participate in this trade if at each stage you need to pay third parties to verify, if you need to get different licenses? So I think when it comes to central banks, when it comes to communication, when it comes to trade and capital markets, DLT has a fundamental role, and I'll stop there because it would be quite interesting to hear from Jose as well.
All right, thank you, Ted. Jose, let me have Jose on board. But for Jose, I would like to know one thing. In your own opinion, Jose, which industries or which sectors stand to benefit the most from the adaptation of blockchain technologies, and why?
Again, a very good question, and I can follow from Ted's wonderful adaptation and also answer your question at the same time. So the reality is, when you look at what a ledger is, and it's the data transportation, and what blockchain does and what distributed ledger does, is it takes manual processes and converts them into an automated process. And this is usually done with something called a smart contract, which integrates the legislation, which integrates the standard operating procedures that are required to perform an action. And in answer to your question, finance was a derivative, as you've mentioned before, with crypto, with the introduction of central bank digital currencies, of the automation of those processes. But the beauty of ledger means it can be adapted into other areas. And for the audience to really understand, if you look at this from hospital records, from the doctor to the patient, to the operating theatre, to the insurer, to the finance paper, that process can be automated. Voting, a classical example of trying to understand the reality of who's voted, as mobile has taken over most of the African continent in terms of a wonderful way of extending the communication. Each individual party is the one source of truth. A ledger interoperability would make sure that you have complete transparency in the chain, who voted for who at what time, and verifiable. And the beauty about the ledger is data efficiency and speed. These transactions, and to put things into context, where it would take many, many hours, transforms the entire process into milliseconds, because everything is processed based on the standard manual process, but digitalized. I hope that explained things.
Yes, Jose, let me stick with you, Jose, for a while. I would like to understand, it's good that you talked about the smart contracts. I want you to elaborate more on these smart contracts, Jose. How do these smart contracts contribute to the functionality of these digital ledger platforms? Because if it is also important for you, or even okay with you, you could share with us some noteworthy examples of their application. How have these smart cards been applied before in the past? And what has been their impact? But most importantly, if you could talk to us about how these smart contracts contribute to the functionality of these digital ledger platforms. To me, I think that would be a good nexus to understand.
Absolutely. If you think about the smart contract as the process of what you undertake, and I'll make this very, very practical. So in the morning, you wake up, and when you wake up, you undertake a decision. That decision process is, I either shower, brush my teeth, eat breakfast in a process. What the smart contract does is it takes that yes, no option and digitizes it. So then those decision trees and the impact of what you do And then the next step, maybe I get in my car and I drive. And the impact of driving is when I drive on the road, I can't go through a traffic light because that's illegal. This is all built into the smart contract, and that creates what's called the automation on the ledger. So everything is based upon decision trees and actions that reflect a reaction on a system. That will apply the same in trade, which is, for example, you have a lawyer, you have to go to a warehousing, a distribution agent, an insurer, where you're subject to contracts and regulations, where you have to go into government, and then you have to get your certifications for trade. These processes never change, but the reality of being able to automate them and make them part of the ledger is what is transformative. That reduces costs, time, options, increases the legal regulation, and also creates a route to trace, which has never been done before. So if you could imagine trying to trace back your steps to getting back into bed in a process, that process may take many people to monitor, but with the ledger, that can be done in seconds. I hope that gives you a good example.
Yeah, thank you so much, Jose. Just one more thing, Jose, from you, still on the smart cards. I wanted to understand, are there any challenges associated with the use of these smart cards that you think are important for us to highlight?
Absolutely, and that is legislation. With everything that is pushed through and speaking through to understanding what digital trade, digital transactions, legal is the binder, and legal needs to lead the route, because with everything that is digital contract becomes a digital process, whereby the legal sector has to take a real push in terms of understanding the beauty of the smart contract and how it interoperates, and also be part of the operating procedures that make sure that these contracts are also to standard for the country, the government, and the transaction that is taking place.
Thank you so much, Jose. Let me talk to Chris as we wind up. Let me talk to Chris. Chris Sanderman, I would like you to talk to us about a few challenges or risks that you think, or limitations that you think are associated with the blockchain technologies.
Yeah, thank you very much. Well, of course, this is a very good question because it's all about adoption and a changing environment in which we want to implement the blockchain technology. And of course, and there's a lot going on at the moment with the Electronic Trade Document Act being accepted in the UK, changing the acceptance of electronic data in trade finance, which is a very important aspect, and I'm sure you're aware of that. But there's a number of challenges ahead of us, and that, of course, for some areas are more essential than for others. When you look at the African continent, in my view, the biggest advantage of Africa in when we take a close look at the adoption capacity of new technology, the continent has to take a head start because there's no legacy or hardly any legacy to get rid of, to depreciate. So the implementation of new technologies in areas like Africa and Uganda, especially, which is a fast-growing economy. For the other countries in Eastern Africa, applies the same, with a multitude of innovations being implemented in the countries, and a very much forward-looking mindset when it comes to innovation and new technologies. I think these challenges are there, but they're minor because there's no history to get rid of. So one of the biggest challenges has already been discussed. It's the legislation, acceptance of new technologies as a means to transact. Another aspect could be the adoption that needs to be done on a large scale. And of course, governments can help there with the top-down approach in bringing new technologies to the market and help the community, the SMEs and the micro companies to adopt new technology as a whole. On top of that, the density of mobile phones in Africa is quite high. And the solution we might bring to the market is based on an app that is easily being uploaded on the smart app, and connectivity, of course, goes with that. It is scalable. The interoperability is no issue, which is of course an important aspect when we look at the parties that need to be onboarded on the platform. Need to be onboarded and create the connectivity for the SMEs intra-country, with governmental organizations, with logistics, with financial industry, with legal parties, with counterparties in trade. That is all required. It has a mass impact. But it's reasonably easy when you look at from the applications perspective. So there are challenges, and they are there. They could be huge, but take a step-by-step approach, and like I said, with the help of the governments in the country, with these adoptions challenges will be covered, and it is important that the application can be uploaded simply when we talk about the availability.
Chris,
so those are those.
Right.
Those
Thank you so much, Chris Sanderman.
Yeah, maybe Jose. No, sorry, Clinton. Maybe Jose, you can add to that.
Yeah, and I just wanted to add on to this very quickly, Clinton, and without taking too much of the time, for the audience to understand, technologies like this require infrastructure. They also, some come with costs, some can be higher, some can be lower costs, which also have to be considered. The interoperability and the communication and the education of parties, which is what you are doing, the benefits. And this is a wondrous act of putting this all together. And these are the steps that can take Africa, continent that has been regarded as a trade structure that is growing, into actually a world leader in terms of its technological infrastructure by using technologies as the distributed ledger, amongst others, to integrate and provide true transparency throughout the continent.
Thank you so much, Jose. For those that are watching us tonight, blockchain technology continues to evolve with ongoing research and development, including efforts to address scalability, energy consumption, and other challenges. But digital ledger platforms, like we have been discussing with our international experts, have the potential to reshape industries by providing more secure, transparent, and efficient ways of managing and verifying digital transactions and assets. And as the technology matures, it is likely to find applications in various sectors beyond finance. Now, this is just a vote of thanks to our international experts. Thank you so much, Jose, for being a part of this conversation. Thank you so much, Chris Sanderman, for being a part of this conversation. And thank you so much for my fellow East African Ted for being a part of this exciting conversation. I promise you to my international experts that we shall have another lengthy discussion on a particular convenient day for all of us, actually, to ensure that we continue to raise awareness, of these digital age platforms, so that our organizations here and other sectors in Uganda and all East African countries can start to use such technologies to address issues of scalability, issues of energy consumption, but at the same time also to have efficient ways of managing and verifying digital transactions and assets. Now, thank you so much for everyone who has been watching us tonight. Thank you so much for being a part of the Smart Tech Show. Thank you so much for understanding what digital ledger platforms are. But I promise you that those that didn't understand what these mean, we shall have another lengthy conversation with our international experts who will continue to educate us on what these ledger platforms do and what it means for us to be a part of such conversations. Thank you so much to my audience. Please continue to be a part of these conversations, continue to be a part of Smart 24 TV. We love you. Thank you, and take good care of yourself. Good night.
Smart 24, driving business.